I've sung this song, but I'll sing it again, of the place that I lived on the wild windy plain. In the month of April, the county called Grey. Here's what all of the people there say. So long, been good to know you. So long, been good to know you. So long, been good to know you. This dusty old dust is a-getting my home, and I got to be drifting along. Well, the dust storm came, it came like thunder, dusted us over, it covered us under, blocked out the traffic, it blocked out the sun, and straight for home all the people did run, singing so long, it's been good to know you, so long, it's been good to know you, so long, it's been good to know you, this dusty old dust is a-getting my home, and I got to be drifting along. Well, the sweethearts, they sat in the dark and they sparked, they hugged and they kissed in that dusty old ark. Sighed, they cried, they hugged and they kissed, but instead of marriage they were talking like this. Honey, so long, been good to know you, so long, it's been good to know you.
So thank you all for coming to help us celebrate the life of my mother, Mimi Orzech. We know many of you loved her and will miss her like we do. We don't have time for everyone to share, so we've invited a few people who knew Mom in various parts of her life to share some memories. So we'd like to start with Sarah, my sister, who's going to tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up in the Orzech home with Mimi as our mom.
I don't think the mic is on. Oh, we can't see
Let's try it. You will know this is not a new problem.
There we go. How about that? Does that work? All right. People ask, what was it like growing up with Mimi and Zev as your parents? The answer is, for us, it didn't seem at all unusual. Kids are very accepting. It was what it was. People coming and going all the time, often extra people for dinner or staying overnight. Our house was never boring. Zev was the people collector, but Mom was the one who enabled him. There was always enough food, no matter what, to accommodate more people. There were clean sheets in the guest room, always. There was a banana cake in the freezer at all times to pull out on a moment's notice. And Cassandra Olson made samples, so there's some on the dessert table. We grew up with an extended family of sorts, and many of these people Dad kept in touch with for the rest of his life. They visited here, Mom and Dad visited there, and on several sabbaticals or on one of their many international voyages. When Mom went back to work, Joe had just started school. He remembers being a latchkey kid. It is now called free-range parenting. Corvallis in the 60s was pretty tame, and the only boundary we had was that we had to be within hearing range when they blew the whistle, indicating it was time to come home for dinner or bed. The whistle was pretty loud, so we could get far. What astounds me now is as I look back with my adult mom, working person's eyes, is how Mom managed everything. In fact, I have no idea how she did it, except to say she had been extraordinarily organized. True, Dad supported women's lib and all that, but not when it crossed the threshold of his home. You know. He took pains to be completely inept in the kitchen. I don't know that he ever learned how to do laundry. Mom was the keeper of the calendar. She took us shopping for school clothes and supplies, etc., etc., etc. She did this while working at OSU, part-time at first, but within a few years she was up to full-time. Then she added on studying for her master's and then PhD. She took on increasingly more challenging work, and she never stopped her volunteering. And when Mom signed up on a project, it was not to show up for setup or cleanup. She took leadership roles, serving on boards, chairing committees, all the while juggling at least 3, and for 1 year, 4 teenagers and Dad. She never appeared stressed or grumpy with us. When we were old enough, she'd call home late in the day and have us put something she prepared in the oven for dinner, or make the salad, but stuff she had already organized ahead of time. There was no takeout pizza, rotisserie chickens, or microwavable microwavable things from Trader Joe's. We ate lots of leftovers. In fact, Dan remembers our first meal back in the house after returning from a year's sabbatical was leftovers. Dad surrounded himself with people, and Mom loved baking and cooking, so it was a good pairing. We all remember the great fondness of their New Year's Eve parties with lots of people, food, and schmoozing. There was always a jigsaw puzzle, which Mom loved, and other games. The same strategy applied to the family camping trips. We rarely went by ourselves. There was always at least one other family or more. We car camped at many Forest Service campgrounds in the Cascades. Of course, Mom got us all packed, prepared multiple days' worth of food, and coordinated everything. Then there were the car trips to Lake Oswego to visit Mom's parents or to go camping or anywhere. We sang. We sang American folk songs, beer drinking songs from Cal, Israeli Chalitzik songs, and children's songs. Her favorites were Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Clancy Brothers, and the Weavers, but there were many others as well. I know she played the piano, though I don't think I ever heard her, and she made sure we grew up with some sort of musical training. Okay, well, maybe not Dan.
Right here.
A few more things come to mind. Her shock at discovering pit toilets in the Vatican Museum. Her distress at leaving her children on various street corners throughout Europe and Israel. On the other hand, Jo remembers how she fell apart sobbing when Sarah walked down the boarding ramp for a year in high school in Israel. And on the other hand, when he came back from nearly 2.5 years in Japan, Mom sent Dan to collect him at the airport. How we grew up drinking powdered skim milk, which she bought in 50-pound bags and kept in a garbage can in the garage. It was somehow better for us. She later apologized to me for that. How she pushed us to independence with one of her signature replies, "Cope." That was the one she applied to Dan and Judy Gordon when they missed their plane in London when returning from their 10th grade year in Israel. I could go on, but other people have stories to tell.
Keith?
Becky.
Yeah, I'm coming.
So, Mary Jo Levenspiel met Mimi in Berkeley, California before either were married, and they have remained friends ever since. From their student days at UC Berkeley to being next door neighbors on Custer Place, their lives have followed similar trajectories in many ways.
Too short. I'll stand to the side.
Are you gonna? Mary Jo. Come on up.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, Dan. I'm Mary Jo Levenspiel.
Oh, you do have to use the mic.
Go ahead. I'm Mary Jo Levenspiel, and this is my daughter Rebecca, and she's standing here with me in case I can't do this. She'll carry on. I want to talk about Mimi, my good friend for 68 years, and we were together almost all that time. I met her first in Berkeley when I was going down to visit my boyfriend, and she and Zev were still students there, and they had a group of friends that met every Friday night, which had become a tradition. They sang folk songs and more folk songs. They argued. They just had, it was a wonderful group, and I only remember the doctor of the group who used to sit and knit. Does anybody, well, never mind. Anyway, that's where we met. And in '52, I married Octave Lebensfield. And on the way home from my wedding party, Zev and Mimi were in the back seat. And Mimi said, "Zev, when are we going to get married?" And Zev said, "Soon." And Tavy and I smiled and we said, "Good." But I have a lot of memories, but I don't know where they are. So, and Zev and Mimi did get married after graduating, and they moved to Corvallis and started the family. My friendship with Mimi happened when we then moved to Corvallis, and we started our families and raised those families and made meals for our husbands and entertained, and that was our life then. And it was a good life. We spent a lot of time together. And then in the summers and the good weather, we would frequently go to the beach at Otter Rock and hang out in the yard. Zev and Mimi would each bring a good book, and they would sit and read, and everybody would do what they just felt like doing. And I don't know if that can convey how comfortable we all were with each other. But we always ate together. And we went camping, I don't know if the kids will remember this, to Canada one time. And the kids all stayed in a big teepee, but we didn't think we particularly wanted a teepee, so we stayed in a motel. So before bedtime, we thought, well, let's go check on them. And we got there, looked in the teepee, and it was full of smoke. There's a place in the middle of a teepee, a fire pit, I think they call it, and they made a fire, and here were these kids coughing and choking. So I don't remember what we did with them or to them. But that was one of the experiences that, I don't know if Becky remembers, but I don't know if no, you don't remember, Joe. Okay, never mind. And let's see, where am I? The hostess, Mimi, of course, you all know that, was a wonderful hostess. And as everyone here, I'm sure, has to know this, she was the very best cook in Corvallis. Absolutely. And everybody knew that. And many of us today still use some of her recipes. And one of the best recipes she ever gave me was the recipe of cheesecake that her mother made. So I always called it Mimi's mother's cheesecake. And I bet a lot of you have that recipe. And it's going to be passed down for generations, I'm sure. And Mimi, who loved cooking, which to some of us is, well, okay, we have to do it. But she was traveling. I don't know where. They were in Europe or Asia somewhere. They traveled. And she took cooking classes on the travels, which I thought was very remarkable. And let's see. And of course, when they were home, as Sarah said, their house was never empty. They had foreign students, they had visiting professors, friends of friends of friends, and of course they always had many parties and wonderful meals and lively discussions. Mimi and Zev and Mimi. I almost don't ever hear Zev's name without Mimi attached, or Mimi's name without Zev. Mimi and Zev, that's just what you kind of automatically say. They were very, very busy people, and one of the things that I have always wondered about was that both of them were very busy. They only had one car. I don't know, any couple can get along like that. I think it just speaks very well of their relationship, that they could manage that. Oh, I forgot a paragraph. While Zev was teaching at OSU, Mimi was working on the SMILE program. And I'm sure somebody here will talk about the SMILE program, which kept her very, very busy and was a tremendous success at Oregon State. Okay, where did I leave off? Okay. After the kids were all grown, all off in their own lives, Zev and Mimi built a house right next to ours. So we were running in and out all the time, family, and they felt like family. We felt that way anyway. And they would come over, and I don't know if we gossip or not, probably not, but we talked about a lot of different things in life. And that's where we lived until we moved and things changed. Oh, after Zev died, Mimi moved to a retirement community in Portland. Probably many of you have been there to visit. And I went up to visit her. And she said, Mary Jo, why don't you and Tammy move here? Because we were of age and needed to be moved. And I got the tour, and I wanted to move right in. Like, I went to the guy who gave the tour and said, well, what do I do, write a check? And he said, no, you go home and talk to your husband. So I did, and he didn't care where he lived. I don't mean to be talking about me, but this is something that involved Mimi because she got us started here. And so we went, and guess what? There was a swimming pool. So we moved immediately into Willamette View. And Mimi was always there. She would come after dinner to watch TV, watch the news, and to just see what's going on with the kids and the grandkids and all that stuff. And when you meet Mimi in the hallway, of course, big smile, big greeting, so glad to see you. And the hallways were full of people all meeting each other. But the Willamette View people couldn't believe she was going to move back to Corvallis. I think it was hard on everybody, including Sarah. And she was given a farewell party, and she was so much loved and respected by everyone at Willamette View. And they still talk about her, and they miss her. And they always ask me, have you seen Mimi recently? How is she doing? They'll never forget Mimi. She was the rock of the family, in my view, and we will all miss her deeply. This is what happens when we get 90.
50 years ago, Casey Kino came to OSU to study. When he showed up on our door, saying something like, to my father, saying something like, hello, Orzech-san, I'm Junpei, please leave me. Of course, Zev couldn't resist. He's been part of the family ever since. Junpei?
Oh, thank you. In summer of 1978, Mimi and Zev ended their year-long sabbatical in Jerusalem and planned to drive their VW bus to Germany, where they rented a car a year earlier, and I joined their return trip to Germany. We first drove the VW bus from Jerusalem to Haifa and boarded a ferry boat to Greece. At the port of Haifa, we said goodbye to young Sarah, who planned to stay in Israel for 1 year. I was in and out of the Orzech family for more than 10 years by then, and I never saw Mimi being so tearful when she parted Sarah. After the ferry boat ride, we had to drive the VW bus from Greece to Italy, crossing the country called Yugoslavia, or in today's names, Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia in that order. The long highway of Yugoslavia was mostly unpaved and windy in 1978 and congested by Western European summer vacationers driving to and from sunny Greece. It was like an outback automobile racing for the transit drivers, including us. Deb and I were the drivers, and Mimi, the navigator, carefully analyzing the map that was written in 100% Greek. The Western European drivers were skillful and wild at the same time. When the winding road was narrow, cars formed a long line following the slowest car in the pack, and as soon as the road widened, fast cars such as BMW and Alfa Romeo began to pass slower cars in an extreme rush on both sides of the traffic. I often witnessed a car overtaking another that was overtaking another, and cars that appeared on a direct collision course near the center of the road. Many of the drivers in fast cars appeared to play the game of chicken. Zeb was among the least chicken-hearted drivers in the pack, and he was absolutely undeterred by the fact that his car was the overloaded and underpowered VW bus. Whenever the road widens, he was the first to jump into the invisible passing lane and attempted to overtake cars that appeared at least as fast as our VW bus. I should also mention that Zeb's driving was not so good. To put it mildly. Zeb was my mentor and showed me how to handle many things in admirable prowess, but driving was not. It was one of those occasions when Mimi was attempting to pass as many cars as he could, and our overloaded VW bus was sliding, skidding, veering, and bouncing on the unforgiving and congested forest road. All of a sudden, Mimi raised her voice for the first time during the trip. Zeb, I want to get home in one piece and see my kids. Obviously, I cannot impersonate Mimi. It was very, very loud. And thanks to that, our adventure came to this screeching halt, and all three of us, including Mimi, came back in one piece. Years later, Mimi was promoted to an associate vice president of Oregon State University, and I attended the congratulatory reception at OSU. At the beginning of the reception, Zeb introduced Mimi to the audience and said, "Behind every successful woman, there's a man." And he smiled. And she smiled too.
Judy Wilcox joined the Orzech family when Zeb invited her home for dinner before a chamber music concert. As usual, without consulting Mimi first. Arriving home, they found Mimi sick with the flu and 3 small kids running wild. Judy quickly corralled the kids, made dinner, and at some point shortly after that, moved in. They missed the concert that night. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay. Let's see. Do I have to press the button?
No, I think it's on.
Yeah, can you hold it for
Okay,
us?
all right. Can you hear me?
Yes, hold the mic.
Okay. 57 years ago, as Dan just described, I had a serendipity moment. I met Mimi Orzech for the first time, and that moment changed my life. Zeb had invited me to their home for dinner, and prior to the concert, and Zeb, of course, had neglected to first ask his wife, Mimi. When we walked in, we both found Mimi very ill with a fever, and she had 3 very young children running around eagerly awaiting their dinner. Mimi, in her trademark fashion, invited me in, smiled graciously, and welcomed me into her home. And from that evening, we became very good and close friends, and I became a member of the family. That was Mimi, always welcoming, always helpful, always very generous. She was so genuine and always available to help. I could count on her to listen if I had a problem and sought her advice. She never told me what to do, but she asked questions, helped me to look at the problem in a different light, and then let me figure out a plan of action. That occurred the rest of my life. Mimi loved to cook, to bake, to entertain. Even with young children and many volunteer activities, she always had room at the table for one or many, many more. She introduced me to many types of food that I had never been exposed to before, and then how to prepare those foods. I brought skills and crafts to her that she eagerly absorbed and utilized. We always had such a good time together, whether it was exploring new places in our travels, shopping, going to the theater, etc. I loved Ashland, where I had been attending since I was 9 years old. Mimi enjoyed it, but usually called and asked what plays were worth buying tickets to see. She enjoyed the whole Ashland experience, not just the theater. She and Zeb introduced our kids to it. They once camped in Lithia Park in those days when you could do that. And the kids also grew to love it. And their grandchildren were introduced by their parents and by Mimi and Zeb, and Ashland became their love too. While at Willamette View, Mimi got interested in trying her hand at being in a play. She had one of the leads. Sarah helped her a great deal by typing up the script in a large font and in a format that helped Mimi read the script and perform the role simultaneously. It was like a reader's theater. The play grew a large audience, and Mimi was a hit. At one point, Mimi lost her place, looked a little lost, but she took a deep breath and she improvised. The audience loved it, and at the end, all the players received a standing ovation for their performance. And Mimi signed up to do another play. A star was born, but of course Mimi had been a star her whole life. When she lived at Willamette View, I was able to see her more frequently. Mimi and I spent every Saturday together, usually knitting, but I often would pick her up and we would go to explore and experience some of the arts of Portland. She was, I can't remember what I was going to say. She was always up for trying something new, and when it was hard to master, she stuck to it. She didn't give up easily. She enjoyed knitting more and more during her retirement. We attended workshops together. She set up a class for Baydam members for a knitting project that I taught, and she tackled hard projects that were really beyond her skill level, but she pushed herself, just like she pushed herself all through her life, accomplishing so much for herself, her family, and her community. Zeb and Mimi were a team always.
Many of you saw that regularly. At home, she helped Zev with his monthly column, his work with Lucia by editing his writing. Zev helped Mimi with her knitting by helping her design a pattern that she wanted, then calling me to review the instructions, then typing up the instructions line by line, stitch by stitch. But when she made a mistake, Zev would go crazy, wanting her to take it out or ask me to fix it. He wanted perfection. Mimi would brush off his concerns, and she would call the error a design element. And she'd proceed as usual unless I told her I could fix it. Then she would allow the error to be fixed. Mimi was a project knitter. I was a process knitter. Mimi always completed her projects, and she never started another one before she had finished the last. I always had many, many projects going. As her memory faded, knitting became frustrating for her, but she continued to rush to finish a very difficult project that she was knitting for her granddaughter. She finally requested that I finish it for her. It is still in progress, and now Mimi's daughter-in-law is working on it. During her work life, Mimi took great pride in her work. She loved to talk about what her goals were, where she was having difficulty, etc. She was most proud of the development of the SMILE program. It gave her such an office to watch these young school children get exposure to science and math, to experience scientific problems, and to work together to solve them, and to experience a university campus at a young age. I love to hear her stories about individual kids, about a project that was a big success at the camp for the kids, and the success of having graduates get accepted into college. It was a masterful program and a crowning achievement to her career. After her retirement, it was a great pride to her to see its continued success, which is still going to this day. Mimi was so proud of her children, and she adored each of her grandchildren. She loved her Bayonne community and was so proud that the Jewish community building was finally being built. I can't begin to talk about all of my memories of Mimi. When I talked to so many about her death, always I heard the same stories, especially from the Israelis, that she welcomed into her home. Universally, the quote was, she was so warm, so generous, so very, very helpful, and always a smile. We had a home here in the States. Mimi was a true mensch, a woman of valor. I loved her so much.
Sure. I had a long speech planned, but I heard there was banana cake, so I'll keep my comments brief. I mean, I just like that. I was struck by so many things that have already been said, and I'm sure many of the things that are going to be said later will resonate with many of you. When we moved here in 1954. My father Harry, my mother Molly, who some of you may remember, my sister Mitzi, who's right here, and my brother David. We were one of the only Jewish families. When the Orzechs moved in 1957, somehow we found each other. It wasn't hard. Both Sam and my father were, let's just say, very outgoing people and memorable. And our families just formed this immediate and long-lasting relationship for the birth of all these three to my nephew's birth right around the same time, and ever since. I've also been struck so far by the comments about how people felt they were part of the extended Orzech family, and that was certainly the case for us. In fact, the comment Sarah made about how there were always people around our houses like that too, and often the people that were around at the Orzech house were some of us, and vice versa. So we mingled with them, we had spent holidays with them, and they're always in our memories. In fact, I can't remember a time from those early days in the 50s and 60s when we weren't doing things with them, whether it was a Seder at Jeff's house and occasionally at Jeff and Mimi's house, or occasionally Mimi's parents' house in Lake Oswego. I remember going there as well. But always in the middle of those gatherings was Mimi. Mimi was always about other people, about making sure they were okay, making sure they were fed, asking about their lives, asking them tough questions sometimes, but always from a heart of love that was just unmistakable. And I'll always carry that with me. She was a fixture of my childhood. So many memories. I was just talking to Mitzi yesterday when Mitzi had her son Patrick at a young age. Mimi brought her up to the house and said, "Okay, this is how you change a diaper." Now, Mitzi already knew that because she raised me when I was a kid. But that was me. She making sure things were okay. When, in fact, and I'm kind of trying to speak for our whole family here, if you'll let me. Another memory that Mitzi had that she shared with me just yesterday was when Mitzi went back to college as an adult at OSU. There was Mimi taking classes, trying to improve herself. But really, my guess is that Mimi was really doing that so she could leverage her passion for improving other people's lives, which she really did with the SMEL program and other things. It's really hard to, in fact, imagine life in Corvallis. I moved back here now, late in my life, as it is now, and I saw Mimi again regularly, and it was like I was never gone. I mean, she just welcomed me back, and it was like without even saying a word. And so that really touched me. She leaves a legacy here that's going to be felt by the community, by all of you in this room, and certainly me in my heart.
Ava Moore entered the sphere of our family when she and Sarah became best friends in high school. She lives in Northern Ontario, Canada, so she couldn't make the trip, but she sent her thoughts. And Lisa Crawford will read Carol's contribution.
Hi, everybody. This is Carol's avatar. Carol is a fiber artist, and yes, her hair really does look exactly like her. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. For any of you who had occasion to visit Mimi Orzech in her office at OSU, you might recognize this slogan from a poster on a wall behind her desk, hanging next to an iconic image of Golda Meir. As a very impressionable 17-year-old, this clear and unapologetic statement of feminist strength, sprinkled with a dose of irony, had a tremendous impact on me. It was 1974. Nixon had resigned in disgrace, Patty Hearst had been kidnapped, Baryshnikov had defected, bombs had started going off in Northern Ireland, and India had successfully tested its first nuclear weapon. The war in Vietnam was escalating, the Equal Rights Amendment was making its ultimately unsuccessful way through a state-by-state ratification process. Those were tumultuous and often frightening times, much like we are witnessing today. And in the midst of all this, Mimi Orzech was completing and defending her doctoral dissertation, working full-time, raising 3 teenagers, actively leading the Corvallis Jewish community, married to the beloved and singular Zev Orzech. May his memory be a blessing. Sarah Orzech was my best friend then, and has remained so to this day, almost 45 years later. As many of you know, the Orzechs had a way of taking people in and making them a part of the family. I was so fortunate during high school to have this second home, where family life was so markedly different than my own. At Sarah's house, life was busy, richly textured, always interesting, filled with art and music, laughter, and life lessons. While Zev held court, it was Mimi who held it all together, made it all happen. Mimi who was the grease and the wheels of family life. I encountered so many firsts in Mimi's kitchen. The KitchenAid stand mixer, bins full of bulk flour, sugar, macaroni, cereal, and powdered milk. Blintzes and bagels, smoked salmon and cream cheese, Murchie's tea, and quince jelly. And the explicit expectation boys would set the table, cook, and do the dishes too, not just girls. It was Mimi who embodied, for me, and I'm sure for many others, that 70s feminist ideal of the woman who could have it and do it all. A professional career, a loving family, a strong presence in a vibrant community, a commitment to social justice that was actualized in words and deeds, a vigorous mind and a heart big enough to hold us all. I was privileged to be an honorary Orzech daughter. Friday night dinners followed by hanging out in the living room, advice on where to apply for university, interest in my grades and studies, generously included in a Thanksgiving trip to Warm Springs. Just imagine what it took for me to organize and pull that off in the midst of everything else she did every day. A full turkey dinner with all the trimmings, 2 carloads of people, including 6 teenagers, Sarah, Dan, and Joe each bringing a friend, food and supplies for 4 days. I remember so many times after a night out with our friends, checking in to let Mimi and Zev know we were home safe and sound, sitting on the edge of their bed where they were both propped up with books and papers reading. And I remember the expectation that I do well. The bar was set very high, and we were expected to rise to it, and I wanted to. They cared about me, they loved me, and I loved them and wanted them to be proud of me. I never stopped hoping to deserve that love and that pride. I grew up and moved away, but whenever I returned to Corvallis, I would always visit Mimi and Seth. We would drink tea and eat cookies. I would be quizzed about what I was doing, hear their stories, and see pictures of their beloved grandchildren. I figured out how to charm Zev, but it was Mimi I had to prove myself to. I wanted her to know, I wanted to show her that I'd taken her example and lessons to heart, that she had inspired me to become the kind of woman she had shown me how to be. Strong, confident, well-educated, principled, joyful, and loving. Her praise, her approval, her dazzling smile of pride and pleasure were so important to me. And at the end of each visit, she would disappear out into the garage, returning to press jars of precious quince jelly. Once Sarah moved back to Corvallis, I had reason to visit much more often. By then, Mimi and Seth had both retired and were enjoying lots of traveling and time with lifelong friends. But things were also becoming more challenging, especially for Mimi, who faced cancer, suffered a serious fall, and eventually began to experience memory difficulties that made it harder for her to enjoy her knitting and needlepoint. But she never stopped taking enormous pleasure in the company of others. Shortly after Zev passed away, she moved to Willamette View, where she could spend her days with close friends who had also moved there. Even after she had to return to Corvallis, she never stopped taking great delight in receiving visitors or being taken out on a Sunday morning to gather with friends over croissants and coffee. That was the essence of Mimi, her incredible capacity to connect with others. I last saw Mimi in May of 2017, the last time I was in Corvallis. I'm not sure if she recognized me, but she greeted me with sparkling eyes and a huge smile, and told Sarah we should all go out to lunch to celebrate. She was very much herself, and I was, as always, filled with love and admiration for this most remarkable woman. I will miss her so very much, as I know we all will. Having now buried both my parents of birth and my chosen parents, I am an orphan. But I am not bereft. As with my mother Ruth, my father David, and my second father Zev, I will hold Mimi in my heart forever, and will always be so grateful for all that she has given me and us. We carry forward her legacy of a life very well lived. Her memory is indeed a blessing. Thank you.
Although not present for the founding of Corvallis Hadassah, Joni Plotkin has been involved with Hadassah past and present. She has some stories of Mimi and Corvallis Hadassah to share with us.
Hi, I'm Joni Plotkin, and I'm honored to be able to speak about Mimi in her capacity with Hadassah. Mimi Orzech was a mentor to me, especially through her Hadassah efforts. You may have read her obituary that states perhaps closest to her heart was Corvallis Jewish community, where she was founding member of the local chapter of the Jewish women's organization Hadassah. Mimi was interviewed by Judith Berlowitz in 1992, and that interview is part of the Horner Museum's oral history collection. In it, Mimi recalls that by 1963, there were 20 Jewish kids of school age, but the nearest school for Jewish learning was in Salem, quite the weekly schlep. Mimi had friends from Portland, her Portland days, who were serving on various boards of Hadassah, and they invited her to a regional meeting held in Eugene in 62 or 63. She drove down, attended the meeting, and got inspired to start a Hadassah chapter in Corvallis. Mimi expressed it this way: "So when I got back, I called a meeting and we decided to use an organization to help us establish something for the children. The group explored Hadassah, but also the National Council of Jewish Women, B'nai Brit Women, and other organizations. They were looking for something more than a social group," she said. "It had to have a Jewish philanthropic purpose." In the end, Mimi says, "I was very Zionistic, and I guess I kind of forced the group in that direction. Anyway, there wasn't any bad feeling or anything like that." She continues, "And although the purpose of Hadassah is not to start a Sunday school, we all thought it was possible to do it that way, so we did. We were supposed to have 15 members. We only had 13. So we decided, what the hell, we're going to do it anyway. And we did." Corvallis Hadassah was chartered in 1964. Its purpose was very clear: to organize a Jewish Sunday school, to have a Jewish women's organization with a philanthropic base. And I've lost my place and I cannot do as Mimi would. And to bring in new Jewish families in order to support a Jewish presence for the local community. Our existing Jewish community, Beit Am, was born out of the local Hadassah chapter 10 years later, in 1974. As I recall, I started serving on the Corvallis Hadassah board when Mimi was membership chair. One thing I remember was that it seemed every year Hadassah would set a goal for us to increase our membership by a certain amount. And that Mimi, year after year, would meet or exceed that goal, and our chapter would receive an award. Mimi shrugged it off and would say something like, "Well, it's nice when a little arm twisting comes." And yet when I have asked other members of the Corvallis Hadassah chapter about their memories of Mimi, the overwhelming responses were, Mimi was a sweetheart, welcoming, gracious, open, and warm. Clara Frost said, "I don't think I ever saw her in a bad mood." Mimi was, and through our memories of her, she will continue to be a strong influence for maintaining a lasting Jewish presence in our community, and she will forever be in our hearts. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I was asked by the family to talk about Mimi's contributions to the Jewish community, and unless you're prepared to stay here through tomorrow evening, you permit me to focus on one set of small incidents that I think typify her many contributions to our community. So tomorrow will be the one-year anniversary of the groundbreaking ceremony for our new synagogue building. Excavation and other site preparation have occurred during the past year, and this week saw the official start of the construction of the new building. Without Mimi Orzech's leadership in the Corvallis Jewish community, it is unlikely we would have arrived at this important milestone. As you've heard, in 1957, Mimi and Zev arrived in Corvallis, a town with no organized Jewish community, which must have felt to them somewhat like channeling our ancestors exiled into the wilderness. That situation quickly changed when Mimi joined with other exiles, as Joni has told us, to form a chapter of Hadassah, the Women's Zionist organization, which immediately proceeded to establish a Sunday school to provide a Jewish education for the children of the community. That status persisted through the 1960s and early 1970s, with meetings for religious services or holiday observations in people's homes or in rented facilities, even as the Jewish community grew. Paul and I were part of that influx, arriving in 1974, just in time for Mimi and Zev to bring us into the efforts to establish a more formal Jewish organization to serve the religious needs of the growing Jewish population of Corvallis, then numbering about 20 families, who in 1975 became charter members of Beit Am, the Mid-Willamette Valley Jewish community. Mimi joined the Beit Am board of directors and soon became its president, in which capacity she served 4 consecutive terms from 1979 to 1983, a term of service unmatched by any subsequent president. At that time, the community still numbered only about 25 families, and its annual expenditures were only $3,500. It soon became obvious to Mimi that the community could not continue to wander for its events from place to place like our ancestors in the desert, but that it needed a home of its own. Soon she had persuaded the members of the board to make finding a home the principal goal of the community. Following a search for available properties, the house on 36th Street was located. In April 1981, the board voted to purchase the house. The following month, that proposition was placed before a meeting of the general membership of Beit Am. Despite the apparent need for the home, approving the purchase was not a slam dunk. Many in our community were concerned about the financial obligations of maintaining a building, while others were nervous about the increased visibility that a building would give to the Corvallis Jewish community. However, Mimi could be very persuasive, and in May of 1981, the membership voted in favor of purchasing the property. This, however, was only the beginning of a nearly year-long process that would engage her talent for persuasion. There still remained the challenge of getting the city of Corvallis to approve our use of the house for religious assembly. Planning Commission staff recommended against approval, citing potential problems with traffic and parking on 36th Street. The staff report was submitted to the Planning Commission, which scheduled a public hearing in which many residents of the neighborhood spoke against granting our permit on the basis of traffic and parking. Mimi argued on our behalf before the Planning Commission, which voted 4-3 in favor of granting the permit, with the chair breaking a tie vote. Mimi repeated her testimony before the Corvallis City Council, which also held a public hearing to consider a formal appeal of the Planning Commission's recommendation by neighborhood residents, and the council voted 6-2 in favor of granting us permission to use the house. This was not the end of the story, however. There remained the need to raise the necessary funds for the purchase. For this, Mimi turned her persuasive charms toward our U.S. Senator, Mark Hatfield, who agreed to be the headline speaker at a gala fundraising dinner that attracted hundreds of people from throughout the Corvallis community. Needless to say, the dinner was a great success, and soon the necessary funds to complete the purchase were acquired. The purchase agreement for the house was concluded in February of 1982, with papers signed by Mimi as president and me as secretary. Following some necessary repairs and fix-ups, the first official event held in our new home was a board meeting in late summer, soon followed by a formal dedication when we carried the Torah scrolls to the new building, and then the joyful first observation of the Jewish high holidays in our own building. These high holiday services were planned during that summer by the Orzechs, the Gordons, and the Cranes in a delightful and memorable series of weekly potluck dinners. Next summer, 37 years later, we may duplicate that sequence of events. We expect to be able to occupy our new building by midsummer. Perhaps the board will meet there in late summer. Following a dedication ceremony when the Beit Am community, now numbering more than 120 families, will place our Torah scrolls in our new sanctuary, we will celebrate the high holidays together in this new facility. It is indeed sad that Mimi, who laid the groundwork to make this possible, did not live to see its completion, but her spirit and her memory will permeate our new synagogue building for as long as it remains our home.
Mimi, in giving birth to the SMILE program, finding the initial funding, and continuing to find funding for the next 10 years. Maya will also read a short note from Graham Spanier, which he sent when we were meeting at night.
Good afternoon. It's pretty amazing to be sitting up here paying tribute to Mimi because she was a dear friend to me, as I know she was to everybody. and she's made such a difference in our lives. Okay, I'm going to stick to my script, but I promised Sarah it would only be 5 minutes. So, it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to talk about Mimi's professional life. I'm going to read a statement from a former provost at Oregon State University who so eloquently described Mimi as a leader and one of the first women administrators at Oregon State. And I want to add that, like everything you've heard today about Mimi, her persuasion, her love, her caring, she brought all of those traits and qualities into her professional life. And there was really no difference in the way she acted professionally as she did within the community. Dear friends and family, Mimi Orzech was a dear friend, a wonderful colleague, and a great humanitarian. And although I can't attend her memorial in person, I wanted to send this remembrance about her. During the years 1986 to 1991, I was the provost and vice president for academic affairs at Oregon State. Mimi was the director of a number of our programs that served underrepresented students, was a liaison to a diverse array of community populations around Oregon, and served as assistant vice president, overseeing many of our academic opportunity programs. She was incredibly dedicated, had a contagiously positive attitude about what was possible, was a role model and a hero to thousands of students over the years, and cared deeply about putting people first. I considered her a great humanitarian, and her legacy will live for generations to come through the students, alumni, and community she served. I also confess to thinking of her as my mother in residence. Moments after I was hired, she and Zev welcomed me to the Jewish community, included me in the Jewish congregation, and always were champions for my well-being and success. She often arrived with special treats to accompany her smile. And back in the days when it was okay to give a hug to someone, she did, even to her boss. I have missed her since the day I left Corvallis to pursue presidencies at Nebraska and Penn State. And I will miss her always, as I know all of you will. Fondly, Graham Spanier. Well, how was I so fortunate to get to know Mimi professionally? As Mimi made a big difference in my professional life. And soon after I was hired as the director of corporate and foundation relations, Mimi, I think, might have been the first person who came to talk to me from the university. And she right away just said, you know, I want to work with you, and I want you to find funding to support programs for underrepresented students. I was kind of overwhelmed, but I thought it was a great idea. And so, but before our conversation was over, she turned to me and she said, "Are you Jewish?" And of course, we connected on that level too, and it was a beautiful and meaningful, both personal and professional relationship. And I have to say, because I know I wasn't alone in this, after meeting Mimi and knowing her for just a few years, I was the president of Hadassah, and I know there were lots of other women in the community who had the same experience, because none of us could say no to Mimi, and we always loved to work with her. So back to the SMILE program, and we've talked a lot about it, and I know many people in this room know about SMILE, but SMILE stands for Science and Math Investigative Learning Experiences. And that's really what the program was all about. So I felt compelled to, I had a lot of demands on me, but I felt compelled to do something to work with Mimi. And eventually we found a few corporations who were interested in having a pipeline of highly educated and diverse workers. And thus, the SMILE program began. It started in just 4 middle schools across Oregon, with the objective to help students develop skills and interest so that they would pursue a higher education. And because of Mimi's vision, persistence, dedication, and brilliance, SMILE has impacted more than 8,000 students since it started 31 years ago. It's impacted and made a difference in 458 teachers, and even better statistic about SMILE, and this is such a tribute to Mimi, that students who attended 3 years and participated in a SMILE club, 69% of them started higher education. I mean, that's so far, that's almost double the national average. So SMILE was really making a difference in people's lives. And it started with just 4 clubs. Now, there are 37 clubs. It started in 4 middle schools. Today, it's in 10 middle schools. It's in 10 elementary schools, 18 middle schools, and 9 high schools. It also started with just 1 college supporting it, and today all 11 colleges at Oregon State are somehow involved in SMILE. Also, within 10 years of SMILE starting, SMILE was recognized by President Bill Clinton with the Presidential Award for Science, Math, and Engineering Mentoring. And that was a huge honor, especially in those days, because there were lots of science and math programs around, but SMILE was recognized, and a lot of it had to do with the teacher training component and all the work that Mimi did. So, and also, within a few years of starting SMILE, there was another state, Rhode Island, who came and they wanted to adopt SMILE, and that program is still going on. SMILE was developed to be sustainable, both in having long-term effects for students and teachers, and also sustainable in funding. And it is pretty amazing, because a lot of programs that start with foundation funding don't make it for 30 years, and SMILE is still going strong. So I have a lot more I could say about the impact that Mimi has made in the world, but we all know the world is a better place, and more people are experiencing better lives because of Mimi.
Mimi's grandchildren each contributed to this next section. Lisa Tuttle wove their stories into a sweet tapestry of memories. Lisa?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here representing the next generation of trained Orzech, so watch out. The youngest generation is Shira and Amital, Joe and Carol's children in Seattle, Dan's Amelia in New York, and Rafi in Corvallis, and my brother Micah, who is now in San Diego. Together we are the cousins. We all have different memories of our Savta and of the house on Crest Place. Since we can't all be here today, I asked each of them to write a few words about Savta to share with you. So Shira writes, "My Savin Savta's home was the last house at the end of Crest Place, a dead-end street. As a small child in the back seat during my family's drives down from Seattle, after singing every song in my repertoire, sometimes just the same song over and over again, I would inevitably exhaust myself and fall asleep in my car seat. As we turned onto Crest Place, my parents would announce our arrival, and I would open my eyes just as we pulled into my driveway. During the early years, I believed my grandparents' house was just the end of the highway. I-5 stretched south from Seattle right into their garage. The house was simply the end of the road. Over the years, I have realized that the last house on Crest Place was never the end of the road. It was really just the beginning." Does this sound familiar? The Crest Place, or Elmwood house, was the end of the road and the beginning of a journey for many new Israelis in town, visiting professors, and it was for me as well, when my family moved from Iowa to Oregon when I was 10. My brother and I lived with our Saba and Savta for the month before my parents found their house in Corvallis. And during that time and many years after, we learned many valuable lessons from our grandparents. Micah remembers. She taught us how to set the table, which fork to use first, how to endure freezing hands to make the perfect knedlach, how to make quince jam, although not well, you can check it out back there, how the benefits of buying in bulk. She showed us that persistence achieves results and the importance of a well-timed plate of cookies. And there's no underestimating the importance of a well-timed plate of cookies. During high school, my Saba helped my brother and I to avoid the language requirement, learn Hebrew. Saba would drill us with content in the living room, while our Savta would hum to herself and putter around in the kitchen. making herself known but not intrusive. If any of you have taken classes with Zev, I think you will understand. He was not an easy teacher, and I think his standards were quite high for this particular class. It was just my brother and I, and another student. So each week, just as my tears of frustration left the course with a plate of cookies or sandwiches, or conspicuously seat herself with a book in a chair nearby just staring at Zev, he would instantly soften. Her influence over him was astounding, and her calming force was reassuring for me, and she knew that. She taught me how to be a powerful woman and the fine art of leading by nudging. She must have been an amazing teacher. All of the cousins remember her excellent cooking. Micah says, she was always happy to see me and even happier to feed me. We both have fond memories of helping her in the kitchen. Amital remembers, being a part of the Seattle Orzech crew, our trips to Corvallis were usually for Hanukkah, Passover, Thanksgiving, or some other celebration or holiday. I will always remember my favorite stories of the Orzech family's Thanksgiving trip. Mexico, 1997. My Sapta and Judy Wilcox managed to pack the entire Thanksgiving meal in their suitcases, including the turkey, and ship it to Mexico. I don't think this was the only time my family smuggled food across international borders. Sapta was a skilled cook and a skilled teacher. She taught me many tools in the strong woman toolbox. She was the only one who could shut Saba up with a glance. She was the first person I saw reading the voter's guide. She surrounded herself with people of value and didn't put up with fluff. She appreciated beauty, be that in her tiny patio garden, or concerto, or a play at the Shakespeare Festival. As we've heard and will continue to hear, she held strong values and acted on those values. So, in her memory, I ask that next time, don't wait for somebody to ask you to volunteer. Volunteer yourself. If somebody does ask, say yes. Stay engaged, vote, invite somebody for dinner. Lead by supporting someone else, or stand strong and lead yourself. I trust you all know this, because she counted you as her friends. Thank you.
Mimi was very happy to welcome Rabbi Benjamin Barnett to Beidam and quickly adopted him as her rabbi. Benjamin.
I want to say first, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. It's great to be back in your presence, and I know that Mimi would be so happy to see Beidam in such good hands with Rabbi Phil, and I know how much the Orzech family has appreciated your support, Rabbi Phil, during this time. I was reflecting back on my time with Mimi. Of course, I got to know Mimi in the last decade or so of her life. And in particular, was thinking of a couple times in which I felt a real closeness in our relationship, our connection with one another really deep, and were two of her most vulnerable times. Not surprising, considering my role. One, when Zev was dying and after he died, and the other of the very last chapter of her life, when her memory was functioning less and less, and her cognitive ability, her ability to take care of herself. So I want to say a little more about those two, but first I want to go back to my first memory of meeting Mimi, which was when Rachel and I and Arava, who at the time was just a baby, came to town to visit for a couple days, a little bit after my interview weekend. I must have met Mimi during that first weekend. I don't have any clear memory of that, but I do know those couple days that we were in Corvallis, and Beidam set us up with a few meals, and one of those meals was at Mimi and Zev's. And Rachel and I and Arava showed up at the house, and Mimi had just gotten home, and it became clear soon after that she wasn't actually aware that she was hosting us. She did everything with a smile and very charming, and I had this sense that I feel like this is something that she goes through a lot. And clearly, as we've been hearing this afternoon, I learned over the years that it was something she was very familiar with. And the words that came to mind, and some of them we've heard already, of her warmth and her kindness, and gentleness was a word that came from me. Just her gentle presence and her ease. Things that I learned to appreciate so dearly over the next 11 years, as we all have. And then I was remembering a couple specific memories of those next few years. In the first few years, my first few years here, I spent much more time with Zev and all his involvement at that time with religious life and different things in the community. But there are a few things that, a couple moments that stuck out for me. And one was a few years in, I gave a talk on the high holidays, sort of out of character for me. It was a little more directly addressing issues in the world, and I spoke about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I remember being very nervous about that, certain things that I was going to say, and I knew that they were going to be controversial with folks in the community, and in particular thought of Zev and how he was going to react. And I remember finishing the talk, and he and I at that point had a very nice relationship, a very nice connection, and finished the talk, and he was right there, of course, right in those first couple rows. He and Mimi were, the UU, and got down, and he kind of said in his way, okay, and kind of gave me the validated where I was coming from, but gave some critical remarks and was challenging. And Mimi, who I never really spoke to directly about Israel or about the conflict, at some point, he had said what he had to say, and she said, I liked it. It gave me things to think about and talk about with him. And again, I don't know specifically where she was at, but I thought that was just beautiful. And the other moment that I thought of was at Judah's welcoming ceremony that a number of you were at in our backyard after Judah was born. And Judah Emmanuel is his name. Emmanuel is his middle name. And this is a story related from Rachel, from my wife Rachel. And she said, Zeb was saying, Judah Emmanuel, it's such a big name for such a for a baby. I mean, it's a lot of name for an 8-day-old. I will acknowledge that. It's such a heavy name. It's such a serious name. And he kind of like belabored the point a little bit. And Rachel said, and that kind of hung there awkwardly, like for a couple seconds. And Mimi offered, it's a beautiful name, dear. And Rachel and I laughed about that later. And this is sort of just like what Eliza was saying. She said, how many times do you think Mimi has found herself in that situation? Just needing to soften the edges a little bit. Just softening the sharp edges. God bless them. And but just softening the sharp edges a little bit. And that was her grace and that was her charm. And then I remember spending time with them at the house that first summer that Zeb was diagnosed and undergoing radiation treatment. And that was when I felt a real closeness begin to develop with Mimi. And then, of course, in those weeks leading up to Zeb's death, and in particular the weeks after, was when I really spent time. We spent time, and I have memories of sitting around the kitchen table at the house on Crest, and Mimi reflecting and reminiscing, and then just breaking down in tears. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm really thinking and thinking about her and holding her in my heart and praying for her that she would be able to move on. And I don't know exactly what the process was through which she decided, or what was decided that she was going to move up to Willamette View. I'm not sure how much that was, where her agency in that, or how much that was something from her, but it felt a sense that was her decision to turn a page and to know that it was time to move on from the house on Crest and to start another chapter in her life. And I felt there was such wisdom there and such courage in there to do that. And as we've heard from a number of people this afternoon, she really did. And I remember when we went up and we had the Chanukah Tabbayit, we hung the mezuzah on her door at Willamette View, and then a few other times that I was up there to visit her, there was a wonderful energy about her, a real renewed sense of her life. I didn't know about the play at all, actually. I didn't know about that, but that felt very true to me of my sense of her during that time at Willamette View. And then, of course, that time came to a close as she moved back down here to Regent Court. And my memories of that time, of visiting her there, have such sweetness to them. such sweetness to them. And my memories, as I was thinking about that, were Mimi pointing to my guitar, or trying to share what it was like for her to hear a particular song, these classic songs like the original Ose Shalom melody, or things that I knew that she knew, and it was clear that she knew, but she wasn't able to locate the words of what she was trying to say. And yet, there was a way in which I still felt like she was saying so much, or maybe saying isn't the right word, that she was expressing so much. And I felt that from her, and I felt that genuine connection. And so much of what we've heard this afternoon is everything that she gave, and how she gave and gave and gave again. And there's a way in which we could look at that final chapter of her life and that she somehow isn't able to give anymore. But I want to say, I received so much from those visits. I received so much from those final visits that I had with Mimi, and I felt her in that final stage of her life to actually be giving extraordinarily. And I remember leaving Regent Court and feeling like my heart was lifted, and feeling like I was left with a deeper appreciation for this life that I am given, for these lives that we are given. And I feel like Mimi gave until the very, very end. And it truly was a blessing to be on the receiving end of her and her life and who she was. And it was a blessing to know her, and I will forever hold her in my heart, as I know we all will. And I hope and pray that her memory, and I know it will be, always a blessing in your lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. So these have all been so sweet. Our last speaker is my brother Joe. And we're going to have a little, after Joe speaks, we're going to have a little musical surprise. And then, of course, because this is about Mimi, it wouldn't be true if we didn't have nosh. So please stick around and have something to eat afterwards. Joe? So, I grew up in a home that actively participated in the mitzvah of Hakmasat Orchim, the welcoming of guests. There were always people passing through our house for a day, or a week, or sometimes even a year. I'm reminded at one time that an old friend from my father's youth was visiting, and he was rhapsodizing about the wonderful tomato soup that Mimi had served. "Oh, it's just like my mother used to make," he gushed. "You must give me the recipe." And my father laughed and said, "All she did was open a can of Campbell's soup and put it in the bottle." I think we heard that the culinary arts was not my father's strong. So it was clear that this visitor was homesick and lonely, and was enjoying having a rare family meal with friends. And while my mother may have gotten her tomato soup from a can, there was one soup that never would have come from a can, and that was her chicken soup, which she served medicinally in the wintertime and festively at all the holidays. And now you can have your very own copy of Mimi's chicken soup recipe. On the back table, we have recipe cards with 4 of Mimi's recipes: chicken soup, hummus, Hungarian nut bars, and her famous banana cake. And I think I also saw a cheesecake recipe back there that appeared somewhere mysteriously. So please help yourself to a copy of each recipe, and at the same time enjoy a piece of the banana cake made for us by Cassandra Olson. Also on the back table are little printed cards with the names of several charitable organizations that Mimi and Ze'ev favored. Should you wish to make a donation in Mimi's honor, please consider one of these organizations. Now, as you've heard, Mimi loved folk music. When she was in the kitchen, there was always music playing, and she'd be singing along. Growing up as we did, in the dark ages before the invention of personal MP3 players, or even cassette tape players in cars, we would pass the time driving between Corvallis and Portland by singing folk songs. And although our mother would say that she couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, that didn't stop her from teaching us many songs. And today, we'd like to sing just one of them in Mimi's honor. So if I could get my family to join me up here, and Rabbi Phil to accompany us, we'd like to lead you all in a sing-along of one of Mimi's favorite folk songs, acres of clams. We would be honored if you would join us. You'll find the Orzech family version of the lyrics on the back of your program. Okay. It goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've traveled all over this country, prospecting and digging for gold. I've tunneled hydraulic and cradles, and I have been frequently sold. This is my part. Yes, I have been frequently sold. Yes, I have been frequently sold. I've tunneled hydraulic and cradles, and I have been frequently sold. As one who seeks riches by mining, receiving that hundreds grow poor, I've made up my mind to try farming, the only pursuit that is sure. The only pursuit that is sure. The only pursuit that is sure. I made up my mind to try farming, the only pursuit that is sure. Rolling my grub in a blanket, I left all my tools on the ground and started one morning to shake it for the country they call Puget Sound. For the country they call Puget Sound. The country they call Puget Sound. I started one morning to shake it for the country they call Puget Sound. In midwinter, I found it enveloped in fog and covered all over with timber, thick as hair on the back of a dog. Thick as hair on the back of a dog. Thick as hair on the back of a dog. And covered all over with timber, thick as hair on the back of a dog. Stayed me a claim in the forest and set myself down to hard toil. For 2 years I chopped and I labored, but I never got down to the soil. But I never got down to the soil. I never got down to the soil. For 2 years I chopped and I labored, but I never got down to the soil. Tried to get out of the country, but poverty forced me to stay. Until I became an old settler, then nothing could drive me away. Then nothing could drive me away. Then nothing could drive me away. Until I became an old settler, then nothing could drive me away. Now that I'm used to the climate, I think that if man ever found a place to live easy and quiet, that Eden is on Puget Sound. That Eden is on Puget Sound. That Eden is on Puget Sound. A place to live easy and quiet, that Eden is on Puget Sound. A slave of ambition, I laugh at the world and its shams as I think of my happy condition, surrounded by acres of land, surrounded by acres of land, surrounded by acres of